All right, everybody, hello and welcome to our season preview series. As always, I'm Shaun, this is the reserve team, and we continue working our way through all the A-League sides in the build-up to the season ahead. At time of release of this video, we are within a week of the new season starting, which means we've got a whole bunch of teams that we're going to try and bring you throughout the course of this week. And another huge team, a foundation side again, Adelaide United in today's episode. Thankfully, when we're discussing all things Adelaide and all things Reds, I'm not alone. I've got two experts here with me to help me through it. First, you may recognise him from his collaborations on the reserveteam.com.au, making his debut here on the channel. It's the killer bee himself, Bill Brooks. Bill, thanks so much for joining us, mate.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to talking some Adelaide United and some football.
Mate, we've been waiting that long in terms of like off seasons and all that sort of stuff, and the crazy year that 2020 has been. The biggest limitation that we're going to have is keeping ourselves within like a 90-minute podcast format. That's really the only challenge that we've got ahead of ourselves today. And also joining us as well, you may recognise him from his work with the Red Army and for most recently taking the title of Best Beard to appear on the channel so far. It's Matt Reid. Matt, so thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me and my beard. I left some of it in the living room, but I brought most of it along to share.
Yeah, look, this is the most closest to clean shaven I've been on the channel so far. After about 6 months of lockdown, mine was looking pretty feral. So yeah, I think you're looking very sharp at the moment. Any good facial hair is applauded as far as the reserveteam.com.au is concerned. So gents, I'm going to run through really quickly a brief history on the Adelaide United background. While I'm doing that, I want you to try and pick out some of the spots that we talk about as being maybe like key memories that you remember throughout the course of that time. Adelaide United, of course, we've gushed about it on the channel over the last few weeks. We've had them very high in our kit rankings videos. You guys are doing fantastic jobs modelling. The kit's available at Adelaide United's website right now. We've also talked about the Cooper Stadium away day experience and how fantastic that is for the league. We've spoken about them with the FFA Cup and the triumphs in that one. Adelaide have brought a tremendous amount of both positive and negative memories for their fans in the division. They are, of course, one of the foundation sides in the A-League itself, but their history actually began just prior to that. In August 2003, Adelaide City withdrew from the then National Soccer League competition, leaving Adelaide with no presence in the national footballing competitions for the first time since 1977. In response, Adelaide United was created in September 2003, with Adelaide businessman Gordon Pickard funding the club for the final season of the NSL competition. They had a very impressive home and away year that season, including a 7-match unbeaten streak during November and December 2003, and they reached the NSL preliminary final, losing to eventual grand finalists Perth Glory. This would be their only NSL appearance as the competition folded to make way for the A-League and a huge revamp and restructure of Soccer Australia. Adelaide United were, though, announced as one of the 8 teams to compete in the first season of the A-League and are, along with Perth Glory and the Newcastle Jets, one of only 3 teams to survive from the National Soccer League era. Initial early success saw the club do well in the first season of the A-League, finishing as premiers and the inaugural season, with the likes of Carl Vart, Ross Aloisi, Fernando Reck, Shenking Chu, a whole bunch of names that Bill's probably never heard of before, but Matt and I are probably nodding our heads being like, yes, they were quality. They did miss out on a grand final that season, but had subsequent grand final appearances in 2007, which we won't talk about, and 2009, but saw the club struggle to win their first championships title on the biggest stage. A long ride and some up and down seasons saw Adelaide finish as both premiers and champions in 2015 and 2016 season, with that very heavily influenced Spanish side. Guillermo Amor, previous Barcelona player and coach, managing the side at that time, a fantastic heartbeat of Spanish international players playing in and around that squad. They beat Western Sydney Wanderers in front of a huge crowd at Adelaide Oval, marking their pinnacle and best performance in the A-League thus far. They had the first very deep run in the Asian Champions League as well for an Australian side, finishing as runners-up in 2008 in the early stages of that competition. And Adelaide has also proven very strong in the FFA Cup, finishing as runners-up in 2017, and currently the record-holding 3-time winners in 2014, 2018 and 2019. Gents, there's a lot that we've just jammed into like a paragraph, which is a tough thing to do when you look back over the club history from a 17-year period, but we've got to try and find the bullet points. We've got to try and find the highlights. I'll go to you first, Matt, because I've gone through some of the older points there. What are some of your earliest or fondest memories of your time with Adelaide United and the things that strike you from their history as being your key moments?
Yeah, look, early into the history, I was often living a bit rural, so it was hard to get to games. We'd tend to get to a couple of games a year. We'd sit in the eastern stand as single people with friends or young family eventually. But for me, the biggest early memory that was probably is right up there with any of the victories that we've had was in October in the lead up to the ACL Grand Final. So the home leg against Bunyakorp. We had ridiculous players. We had Cristiano playing, who's now still working with the FFSA. Christian Barbiero, Diego Walsh, Travis Dodd, and all these boys. 0-0 at half time. Not sure what's going on. 57th minute, we score a goal. Then we knock 2 more in, including a penalty late in the game to secure a 3-0 first leg lead. It was a packed stadium. It was on sunset. I've got this incredible photograph of the sunset in the background of High Marsh. It's the most beautiful ground and packed to the rafters, and never known a noise like it, barely heard a noise since. And for that to lead us into the second leg to eventually make the grand final was just, that's what really ignited my passion for Adelaide United ever since, really, just to be involved in that. Everybody else will speak about the Premiership win or the FFA Cups, but in terms of an early highlight, that's absolutely there.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting parts about that 2008 run, and it kind of gets a little bit forgotten because when we talk about the Champions League, it's Wanderers just tweeting in all caps lock at us the entire time. But we didn't quite realise how difficult that competition actually was at that time, and I think we kind of underappreciated or maybe started to expect too much out of our sides in that competition. I remember Fabian Barbiero and Travis Dodd in particular. It was like watching different players from the regular A-League season. They just were on fire in that competition and a huge part of the run through to the final, which of course, phenomenal achievement. Same question as well for yourself, Bill. Obviously a bit more recent history for you to applaud. FFA Cup wins, finals wins, all that sort of great stuff that I can only dream of as a Melbourne City fan. But what are some of your earliest and fondest memories of Adelaide United?
Yeah, well, admittedly, I was quite late to the club in terms of not even following football too closely until probably the season, ironically, after we won the Champions League, not the Champions League, the Championship, sorry. We won the double, the Premiership and the Championship, which is going to make me just sound like a bit of a bandwagoner, but admittedly, I didn't watch the final or anything like that. And I just started to sort of pay a bit more attention to football, got into it through school. And one of Dad's friends who went to most games said, "Oh, do you want to come to a game with me?" I don't know if you remember this game, Shaun, because it was against Melbourne City, and we were on a pretty shocking run at the time. We had injuries, we had so many players out, and my dad's friend was like, "Yeah, don't expect too much tonight. No chance we'll get a win or anything like that." And Tim Cahill, Bruno Fornaroli, all these incredible players from Melbourne City, and I think we went one down within 5 minutes or something like that, and I think maybe it was a LaRocca own goal. I can't remember for the life of me, and I can't remember who equalised. I can't remember how that happened. But I'll never forget Mark Ochieng scoring from just outside the box after he'd been played through by Sergi Guardiola, and the euphoria I felt at that moment was nothing like I'd ever felt like an AFL match I'd been to before, and that sort of thing, and that really sold me to the Adelaide United dream. And obviously the more recent memories sort of combined with their fake buttons and that sort of thing, like Kurtz's first, I missed out and didn't quite get all the way in the final, and then obviously we had a bit more success the year after, and then again last year, it's probably much to your dismay, Shaun, but no, it's to be, in my short time as an Adelaide United fan, I've been very lucky that we've had quite a lot of success.
So I've travelled to Hindmarsh Stadium probably about 6 times, and I think I've seen 1 victory. So I was at that game when Mark Ochieng got I don't know what we were doing. He ran a mile and then finished from distance as well, which was fair enough, great finish and whatever else. I guess the one silver lining that I'll take from that fixture is that we've added one more football fan to the local Adelaide scene. If I had to go there and watch my team lose, I guess that's the one thing that I can take away from that as being a positive. But, some fantastic memories. And just because it's recent history, this is what we need. The A-League, one of the things that we always talk about, and we've exhausted the topic in the channel, is how we engage with new fans. So the fact that you've come along to the match day experience and enjoyed it a lot, and I'm sure a late winner and 3 points probably helped that quite a bit. I'm shattered it had to be at my expense, but that helped quite a bit. But it's always great to see new people getting involved with the game and following the competition and all that sort of stuff. That's exactly what we want to see, mate. So recent history is just as valid as old history. The only thing is that Matt and I probably feel guilty that we remember 17 years ago, which is my mind-boggling for me to say when the league itself actually started, which is just crazy. It shows how far we've come in the relatively short history of the A-League itself. We are going to run through the last 5 finishes of the A-League seasons as well. Of course, 15-16, we've already mentioned premiers and champions that season. Interestingly, and I didn't mention it through that spiel, going from the bottom of the table at various points throughout that 15-16 year to finishing top of the table hasn't been replicated since. In 16-17, Guillermo Moore obviously left, a couple of Spanish players left as well, and dropped to a 9th place finish. 17-18, a 5th place finish and an elimination final defeat. In 2018-2019, a 4th place finish and a semi-final exit. And last season, a 7th place finish, fading away after the lockdown period to drop out of the finals positions. Obviously, not making finals is frustrating. Obviously, the 2020 or 2019-2020 season felt like it went for about 2.5 years, given that we had that lockdown break, and then it was obviously, I think, a lot more challenging for the interstate sides once we resumed play in the Sydney hub. But for you guys, can you pick out some of your highlights from the 19-20 season? Bill, I'll go to you first. What were some of your highlights from last year?
And well, admittedly, I didn't get as many games as I would have liked last season. I was pretty flat out, which I'm looking forward to rectifying this season. But and we had an interesting season under Vivek, and he definitely split opinions, on his football style. And he started very well, and obviously winning 4-0 in a cup final is a highlight. I don't think there's much you can say about that that's too negative.
Who did we beat? I can't in the final.
Yeah, thanks. I was waiting for that one to come, but that's fine. Let's get them all out of the way early in the podcast, and then we'll come back. Nah, all good, gents. You were the winners. I can't complain.
I do remember going into that game with no confidence after we'd lost the weekend prior in the league, and I thought, McLaren's in such incredible form. He's just going to bang in like a hat-trick or something like that. And we went 1-0 up in the first half after Toure scored that goal, which he somehow found that angle against, I think it was Bazanis in goal. And at half-time, I was with a few friends, and I just went, just City are too good. They'll come back from this. And one of them was like, yeah, we'll score like 3-4 goals. And I'm like, no chance, mate. And then for it to happen was unreal. But the only other game I managed to get to was a 3-1 loss to Western Sydney Wanderers. It was 2 days before my birthday, which wasn't a really fun experience. We had a penalty. Was it 3-1 or 3-2? I can't remember. But we had some real opportunities late in the game. There was some VAR dramas and penalties and highlights last season. We started the season really strongly, and I think the latter, early part of 2020 was rather disappointing. With the form, I remember significant losses to Newcastle and Western United, who, to their credit, were phenomenal, and we were just pretty average defensively. But then we obviously went into lockdown. But I think the most exciting part of last season was the post-lockdown football we played under Carl Viet, and seeing so many of the youngsters that we'd seen glimpses of after, in the years gone by, and the foreign coaches hadn't really wanted to touch them and probably give them the opportunities that they maybe deserved on their merits in the youth team and set up and that sort of thing. So, you think the likes of Lachlan Brooks, Pacific Nyongabiri, and all those types of players, it's really exciting to see them get the opportunity under Viet, and obviously I think it bodes really well going forward for the club. So that was probably my sort of few highlights from the season.
Yeah, we will talk a little bit further later in the podcast about Carl Viet and the coaching setup that's currently at Adelaide. But same question for yourself, Matt. What were some of your season highlights from the 19-20 season?
Yeah, I think the cup victory is an obvious one, but just watching the evolution of the playing squad and the youth coming through was exciting. A few of the names that those of us who maybe follow the NPL had heard and seen a little bit, just watching them grow and develop, and the likes of Gamolka in particular after the lockdown, who hopefully you guys will benefit from, although I understand he was playing in the reserves on the weekend in a trial game. It's a bit disappointing. I'm hoping he gets his chance, but I think I'll actually talk more on my lowlights just momentarily, because we, a bit like Adelaide United, I kind of struggled near the end of the season. Just before lockdown, we had a family road trip, and we drove across to Sydney with the camper trailer to Parramatta to watch Seven New Stadium. There was a close-up of me during the Fox football screening of the game, which has become a meme since, because I looked like a man who was about to jump off the top rafter. And then we travelled down to Melbourne to watch us lose to Victoria, just empty head. And and then home to watch us lose to the Jets before we before we then went into lockdown, the last professional sporting match before everyone shut down. So, it was a very depressing nearly end to the season. But I hope that just speaks to the passion that we show, that I'm still here and willing to talk about it.
Look, loyalty from a fan base, like, here's my thing, right? And I just say this as someone who has more away day trips where I've lost, is you haven't really made it as an A-League fan unless you've done that away day experience and gotten beaten 4-0. Like, that's the mark of a true fan. Like, that's a real A-League experience. The Bills, you probably haven't experienced it yet, but that's probably more of a credit to Adelaide United not getting beaten 4-0 quite that often. But yeah, I think it is definitely a rite of passage as far as A-League fans are concerned. But you guys do have, when you're at home, a phenomenal stadium. We have kind of spoken about Coopers a little bit, and it is fantastic news that they're getting a bit of an upgrade to that stadium ahead of the 2023 World Cup, which is great to see. In one of our earlier podcasts on the channel, we talked about Coopers as being one of our favourite away day experiences. It is definitely one of the ones that I circle on the calendar each season and say, okay, here's where we're going to Adelaide, because hopefully Tiger will have some like $99 flights or something like that week, because the drive is a nightmare. But it is a fantastic place to travel from an away fan. But for you guys, the home experience, like obviously heavily involved in the Red Army, obviously getting involved in and around that stadium week in, week out. What are some of your thoughts on how Coopers suits Adelaide as a home venue, and what are some of your hopes in terms of how it's going to progress as a ground ahead of this season and of course moving forward to the World Cup as well? Matt, I'll let you have the first crack at this one.
Yeah, look, I think everybody who goes to Hindmarsh has that same experience. That proximity to the playing surface is unrivaled, I think, anywhere in Australia. The banter is very easy for the players to hear. You're just so close. Capacity is good. Getting even 8,000 to 10,000 there is enough to give a pretty sort of raucous crowd. With the new improvements that are going to come in, a roof on the eastern stand, increased corporate capacity. They're putting in reinstating 4 change rooms so that we'll be able to have double headers back there again, so the W League and the A League playing together. Lots of really exciting changes happening, which the stadium management team on Tuesday night said that they're expecting will enhance probably the stadium for another 15 years. So we're not going to lose Coopers anytime soon. Having that stadium so close to the city and fairly good parking and easy transport, it's a pleasure to be there. From that base support perspective, it's a bit of a shame we didn't get a roof over where we sit in the improvements, but you never know, they might find capacity for that down the track. But even so, just having that proximity to the players, you just get so much more involved. I feel the players are literally there when they score, celebrating with you. You're immediately involved. You're immediately involved during warm-up, and they're warming up right there with you and right in front. I love Hindmarsh. I'd be happy to stay there forever.
Yeah, I think the fascinating part that you've mentioned is the atmosphere that it creates. We've talked about like trying to get away from oval stadiums in Australia for quite some time, and obviously it's not the most realistic goal given the development and the investment that's taken. But Adelaide, I think, or Hindmarsh or Coopers or whatever we're going to refer to it as, it is really the one stadium that feels not just a rectangular stadium, but a football-specific stadium because of the way the seating is tiered, the way it's structured. Like, you are right on top of the action. It is built and developed for a football-sized pitch. Acknowledging my bias 100%, I love Amy Park, and Amy Park Full I think is my favourite environment in the A-League itself. But again, like same thing, it is a dual NRL stadium, so you are 50 kind of metres back from the edge of the 18-yard box, if that makes sense. It's not quite as on top of the action as you are at Hindmarsh, and I would even argue from an away fan's perspective, a full Hindmarsh stadium with 20,000, that is arguably a better atmosphere because of the way that stadium is built and structured than 60,000 at Etihad or Etihad, as you mentioned earlier. Bill, same question for you. Obviously, you've really kind of only gotten involved in the club in the last few seasons, perhaps even in comparison with some other sports in the South Australian area. How do you rate Hindmarsh and the matchday experience there?
Obviously, I think we're very blessed in South Australia and particularly in Adelaide to have such incredible sporting venues. Not only Hindmarsh, which I think is incredible, and I'll touch on that in a minute, but obviously the Adelaide Oval, it's no secret that that's an incredible ground. Hindmarsh is just It's got a special place in my heart, especially because my very first experience there really sold me the footballing dream, and led me on to playing football, and just following Adelaide United so closely. It definitely holds a special place in my heart, and I think I was listening to the members forum the other night because I missed out, but it's on Spotify and it's on the socials, so by all means go check it out if you have any interest in where the club's going. And I think it was Bruce Gitte, and I think it might have been Nathan Kosmina, the CEO, who they discussed. Obviously, there's some form of bias in the statement, but when the conditions are right at Coopers, it's probably the best footballing experience in Australia, in the country. But they did acknowledge on flip of the coin, when the stars don't align and the conditions aren't right, it can be one of the worst. And we had last season, I didn't make it to the game in the end, but we had the game against Newcastle in the evening where it was still about 38, 40 degrees when the game kicked off, and I can't imagine how miserable that would have been at Coopers. And I'm complete polar opposite to that. When it's wet, there's not a lot of places to take cover unless you're undercover there, which is limited in Coopers. But as a whole, I think we're incredibly lucky in Adelaide to have such a fantastic stadium to watch football in. It's so I guess football centric, if you appreciate that term. But I think we're just incredibly lucky in Adelaide compared to some of the clubs we have to ground share with other codes and things like that. To have our own dedicated football stadium, I think is incredible. So.
Oh yeah, there's 75 different teams across 15 different codes playing at Amy Park this year, so you guys are in a very fortunate position. The interesing part that you mentioned is that
about that, I couldn't help but like it. You just think, you're not wrong with Woo now looking to play their home games there. Like, I agree with you entirely. Amy Park is a sensational football ground to watch at, and I think it's only been surpassed as my second favourite by the Parramatta Stadium now, just simply because of how that's been built. But yeah, how's the turf going to hold up?
And you know what, the part that we haven't even spoken about yet is that as we start relaxing international restrictions, I guarantee Taylor Swift will play like a week of concerts on that venue, and it'll be destroyed after something like that. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into that, but don't wind me up, Matt, because I will go for 45 minutes and ruin this Adelaide specific podcast talking about the playing schedule at Amy Park this season. But I think what you mentioned, Bill, like acknowledging bias is absolutely fine. Like, I think every piece of content we've put out, we've been biased about in some form or another. That's just the nature of fan media. So as long as we call out our bias before we say it, that's absolutely fine, and we can continue going with that. One of the interesting things I think you mentioned, Matt, and this is pure speculation, there's no fact to back this up, this is just me going off on a riff, is I'm kind of hopeful the way that you mentioned Western Sydney Wanderers' new stadium and Bank West, the first safe standing that we're seeing. The reason that they haven't done the same development for the homestand at Adelaide United is perhaps they're looking to the future and saying, okay, how's safe standing going to work at Bank West, and how can we potentially make that the next development piece at a Cooper Stadium? Because if it works out well there, it wouldn't shock me to see other stadiums around the competition and around the league hoping to adopt a similar style and a similar structure. But I think 2019, 2020, we didn't learn as much as we wanted to about that match day experience because the Wanderers were garbage and none of their fans rocked up. Hopefully, Carl Robinson's kind of injected a bit more life into them and we see a full Bank West stand and full safe standing this season. And then maybe, fingers crossed, in a couple of seasons, you and I will be complaining that when you're in the home stand, you have to stand for the entire 90 minutes and don't get a break to sit down half time. So there's a whole bunch of different things that could come out of that.
I stand the whole game.
Yeah, I mean...
I don't sit down during the whole game. There were some rumours bouncing around the Red Army that they were looking to install safe standing with this upgrade that's been announced. It wasn't discussed at the fan forum specifically. Lost you for a second there.
Yeah, lost you for a brief second, but I think I got what you were saying. The fan forum had mentioned that there was potential for safe standing, but we are not going to put our heads on the chopping block and say that it's coming because people will come back and fire us up on Twitter. But yeah, it would be something I think fantastic to see. I think if you, as you mentioned, Bill, like it is one of the premier venues within the league. If they can get that safe standing option and get it to work, it's going to add an entire different layer onto what is already a fantastic match day experience at the stadium. We are going to jump across to the kit corner as well. Thank you so much, gentlemen. I didn't ask you to do this, but somehow you've coordinated both the home and away kits there, and they are looking fantastic this season. We did put both towards the top of our ranking list earlier this week, which you can check out on the channel. But you guys are wearing them. You're the best people to speak about this. What are some of your thoughts on the kit offerings this season? They have slightly changed the Adelaide United colour palette. You can see those navy sitting on Bill's shoulders, which I think is a fantastic addition, but that's just my chipping in my 2 cents. Bill, what's some of your thoughts on the home kit this season? And then Matt, in a moment, I'll get yours on the away away kit as you're both wearing them. Bill, you're up first.
I personally love the home kit, which is obviously why I've splashed out into purchasing one. And I think obviously when UCAN were announced, I was a bit skeptical because just purely because I'd never heard of UCAN before. But I think they've done a fantastic job, and I think the ode to the South Australian colours and sort of really embracing where we're from is quite nice. And probably doesn't come through too clear on this, but I really like the little patterns on here that's like a zigzag, and something about the badge we were discussing earlier. We quite like how it's not just like a stick-on sort of whole badge. It's actually got texture to it, which is just the little things, the nuance in the kit, which we quite appreciate as self-confessed kit aficionados. But I'm quite really enjoying the embracing the South Australian sort of colours and really digging into where we're from. And I think it's a really impressive home kit, and I can't wait to see it at Coopers this season.
Yeah, I think the original. Oh, you're gonna spin it around. Yeah, custom.
Dorigo and signed today.
Perfect. Of course, it was the fan day earlier today at time of recording for people that did go and get to check that one out in Adelaide, which is always fantastic to see. I think it was the 2003 season. It's very similar to that kit where it's got the additional navy kind of like accents and everything, which is great to see. And I also really loved, and I could get the year wrong, I think it was 2017, 2018 where you had that FFA Cup kit with the navy shorts. And there was that Craig Goodwin final where he basically just won you guys the trophy on his own. I thought that was a fantastic kit. So to see that navy come back into it, I think it really adds quite a bit. Like, obviously, the reds, you're always going to be the reds, and reds will always be the primary colour. But I think it's fantastic to see that additional accent. And you look very sharp in it, Bill. You can wear it out on a Saturday night and get a bit of adulation from whoever you're trying to catch. And Matt, same question for yourself. You've got the yellow and red number. What are some of your thoughts on the away offering this season?
Yeah, look, I was torn because as soon as I saw them both, I needed them both. The finances around Christmas aren't always that loose. So I was eyeing them across from the barbecue that we were cooking today, the fan day, the whole morning, staring across at the merch tent. And I walked over there probably 4 or 5 times just to get a closer look, to try on a different size, go back and discuss and debate. My son ended up getting a grey player's jacket, which looks sensational. Again, I wasn't sold on the grey, but UCAN have done a wonderful job putting together kits for the first time for a professional team outside of China. Look, honestly, this is the first time either of us have worn it. Everything from the collar being a little V-neck is more comfortable for us sturdier lads. The texture of the logo, I like the yellow and red has been something different to the white we've had for our away the last few years. Gotten a little bit tired of it. I'd like to see a black, although they've got a black keeper kit which looks very good. I wouldn't mind getting my hands on as well, but I just think it harks back to to what we wore when we played Liverpool as well. It's very similar to that, certainly the same colouring. So a little bit of maybe a touch on that history in the concept. Couldn't be happier with it.
It looks fantastic. We've come so far in the A-League from the days of wearing those Kappa turtleneck shirts in the middle of summer where no one really paid any attention other than giving us our own colour palette for the same template kit, and even back to the Reebok kits of the initial seasons where everyone just had a different colour but it was the same kit the entire time. I think the fact that we're getting more bespoke kit options for different clubs is one, as you've already mentioned, killing all of our bank balances in the lead up to Christmas, but also it adds quite a bit to the league. We've spoken with other people on the channel about their involvement and exposure to the A-League initially was just looking at the kits on FIFA, and that was how they learnt about the league and then started to follow it and get involved. And the more audacious kits we can have. I quite like the yellow. This isn't to discredit in any way. It is a little bit Ronald McDonald, but I kind of love that about it, just with the different colourway that it's got. And I think, exactly, you can flex that arm there, Bill, just to get the promotional branding out there. And if Macca's is looking to sponsor any podcasts or wanting to get on the channel, by all means, we're open to any sponsorship opportunities that that they're going to offer. But the additional detail, and this is the part that I love most about this one, is that they haven't been as strict or as stringent with changing the crest colorways. You can see the A-League logo being all red there, the Adelaide United logo being all red there. Like, that just adds a little cherry on top of what is a very, very good kit. We want to see more stuff like that in and around the league. But a fantastic offering. You boys are very fortunate. We'll see how they hold up as you get stuck into the sweaty nature of this podcast business. If they carry you through the 90 minutes, we'll be absolutely fine. We are going to jump into probably one of the longer discussion topics that we go through each season. We're going to start talking about the playing group a little bit as well. I'm going to start with the players out, and I'll run through this list of names, and then what I'd like for you guys to do is to pick out the players that you think are going to be the most difficult to replace, or even potentially on the other end of that spectrum, which players are you kind of glad to see the back of that you didn't necessarily think worked out as far as transfers are concerned. But the biggest one, or not the biggest one at all, but the most recent one, James Tracy getting his contract mulched and then immediately signing for Western Sydney Wanderers. I don't know how quick those negotiations must have been. I'm not going to try and point fingers, but were Western Sydney talking to him before he had his contract released? We'll never truly know. Riley Mcgree leaving to go to Birmingham City, to Charlotte FC in the MLS. They don't join that competition until 2022, so he will be at Birmingham City on loan up until then, doing quite well at the moment. Lachlan Brooks signed for Brentford. He's technically in their B team, playing a variety of friendlies with their under-23s this season, but fantastic move for him. Nikola Miluznic heads to Randers FC in Denmark. Taros Gomulka, who we've already mentioned, makes the jump across to Melbourne City. Michael Maria leaves. He's still unattached at time of recording, or at least I couldn't find which club he's currently playing for. Mirko Boland has returned to lower league Germany, playing in the 3 Liga back in his home country. Paul Izzo has joined the Popovic Revolution at Xanthi in the Greek 2nd Division. George Blackwood is playing under Harry Kewell at Oldham Athletic, and Christian Opseth has headed over to Bengaluru in the Indian Super League. Bill, I'll let you have the first crack at this one, mate. Which of those players do you think is the biggest loss, and overall thoughts on the departures this year?
Well, I think there's a few standouts for me in terms of just pure disappointment, disappointment, but perhaps happy to see them further their careers, and the likes of Paul Izzo and Riley Mcgree have been great servants to the club in maybe even shorter periods at the club, but have definitely earned their moves away from the club in that respect. Some more, the likes of Taras Gomulka moving to Melbourne City was perhaps a bit disappointing in terms of being such a promising prospect. Uznic is particularly frustrating for me because I think I've complained for years about how I think the only thing his game lacked for quite a while with his pace and his link-up play has always been good. His finishing seemed to let him down. I think last season he finally started to fix that, and now he's disappearing. Blackwood, I think, tended to split hairs with Adelaide United fans. There's some who supported him, some who found him very hard to get behind. Seth, I was actually probably one of my biggest disappointments because he didn't score many goals last season, but I think if you really watched him play, I think his link-up play was absolutely phenomenal. Obviously, we've gone out and replaced him, but I was particularly a bit upset to see him go. And then obviously, I think the real notable one is James Tracy obviously leaving. The circumstances he did, and it's a bit disappointing, I guess, the way it all panned out. And you touched earlier on the conversations they'd had, and I think they touched on it at the members forum. They're actually extremely transparent with us and explained that back when we didn't know what was going to happen with the season, we realised we were going to have to let some players go because we just couldn't afford to keep them. Tracy was one of those players that was told to explore his options, and when we sold the players we did, Mcgree, Izzo, all of a sudden we were in a very different financial situation, and we encouraged him that now things have changed, you're welcome to stay. And then the rumours started coming out in the news, and Bruce said he spoke to James and he said, what's going on? Like, we want you to stay. And James, by Bruce's recounted the story, said, nothing's going on. These people always write things in the media, and nothing to it. And I think during that time the Wanderers inquired, and we said he was a required player. That was the reply I believe the club said to him. And then after that, there was one particular article, and they were on a camp in Sydney the other week, and Bruce inquired about that article because it seemed that the journalist had some pretty good sources by Bruce's own account again, and James said again. That weekend they got an email from James's father asking for a mutual termination of his contract. So it's hearing all that, and it's refreshing, and it's nice to have that transparency from the club. It's just extremely disappointing nice to know the way it panned out, especially in those circumstances now. But he's disappointing in terms of that respect. But I don't think we ever saw the best of James Troisi. So in that respect, I'm not as disappointed. It's just the circumstances, I think, for that one.
Yeah, I mean, and if his dad starts firing up in the advertiser on Monday morning going after you, he's got to go through me first, mate. So we'll have you back in whatever media battle plays out this week. But yeah, I think Tracy's a fascinating one. I think the worst thing that ever happened to his career was scoring that goal in the Asian Cup final. Like most people you'd think at a professional level would finish with a keeper spillage from 6 yards out. But since then, he's very much like, I think it wasn't that long ago that he signed for a team in the Israeli Premier League and then was apparently about to sign a contract at Melbourne City and then ended up back at Melbourne Victory and then mulched his own contract at Melbourne Victory again and then went to Adelaide. I don't think he played particularly well at Adelaide, and I don't think he's played particularly well in quite a few seasons, which is why Victory were happy to let him go. I think he thinks, though, that he's still an elite level marquee player despite being 32, 33 this upcoming season, and that's not the reality of what he is, and maybe he needs someone other than his dad to sit him down and tell him that. And by all means, hit me up on Twitter if you disagree. That's absolutely fine. I look forward to meeting your burner accounts, James, if you are listening in, fan of the show. But Matt, same question for you. There is a long list there, and there is some talent in that group. Anyone that you jump out as seeing as being the biggest loss for the season, or anyone that you think is, a good move as far as moving them on?
Yeah, look, Ronnie Mcgrazy, the obvious one. The first player to have been purchased by the club for reportedly around the $900,000 mark. All reports are we've made profit from his sale, and he's moved on to some solid opportunities to continue his growth. He was told from the outset when he was brought in by the club that 3 years' time we don't want to see you here. That's effectively what Bruce Gite said in the media, said we don't want to see him still here in 3 years' time. If he's still here in 3 years' time, we've done something wrong for his development. So for Riley to go is terribly disappointing from a fan perspective because he's an exceptionally good young player. But yeah, I hope that he will continue to grow, and we'll see plenty of him in the green and gold in years to come. And who knows? He might come back home to Gawler one day and play for us in his 30s. But I hope not before then. But I'm excited for Lachlan Brooks. Lachlan Brooks, I think, has always had the potential. Be curious to see how he goes in the Danish first tier. I think he'll certainly find it a step up. The pace he holds, I think, will keep him in good stead. Paul Izzo, for me, is the one that hurts the most, though. His Instagram and social media banter is absolutely top notch. The way he bounces off Elsie and some of those other boys, Straney, is always very entertaining. He's always kind to supporters, but watching the way he developed, particularly in the last season, to be honest, I mean, even though our performances didn't really match his performance all the time, he has always had the shot-stopping ability, with his distribution improved out of sight, I think, under the tutelage of Eugene Galekovic. And that was the biggest change, I think, in his play. So I think that's probably what's given him the opportunity to go and explore internationally. Greg second tier, I would think, is probably on par in many ways with the A-League, or maybe a little lower, but just the exposure over in Europe, I think, should give him some opportunities. I was always a big fan of Merkin Boland as well. Shame to see him go. He was getting a little bit long in the tooth and had slowed up a bit. Honestly, at the end of the day, the biggest loss we've had was Yongbin Chen. Yongbin Chen has returned back to the Red Lions, to Quindale, having featured in, I think it was our youth B team. He ran the line for one half, and I think he brought the orange along. A really good prospect, clubman, obviously. Just a shame to lose him.
Yeah, I mean, and you guys have a Chinese kit manufacturer and a Chinese player. Imagine how many you would have sold and the revenue you guys would have gotten from having that big household name here again for another season. It's I'm not going to point fingers at Bruce Gite, but he's making some weird business decisions if these are the football decisions that they've made for the upcoming season.
It was an enormous market we got tapped into. I mean, it is likely to be the Ilkish and Quinn Hugh, just become that new face of Adelaide and the A-League in China. But never mind.
Truly undeniable quality, though. I mean,
yeah. I'd love to touch on James Joycey as well. I guess Bruce stood in front of 100 odd members, recorded and distributed through social media his take on the situation. James and his dad have told their side of the story as well. They contradict one another. I know which one I'm more inclined to listen to and believe. It just seems a little strange that 18 hours after they've departed, that Western Sydney Wanderers already had pretty poorly put together graphics to announce his signing. Sorry to my friends who are Wanderers supporters out there, but I wish you the best of luck with him, because he's not the quality he used to be. I don't know where he's going to fit in your squad. And for us, Stefan Moor's going to get more freedom and more opportunity to roam up front without him getting in the way now. So good riddance to bad rubbish.
Yeah, exactly. We'll come back on Stefan Moore in a bit, because I've got follow-up questions as well. I think just touching back to Riley Mcgree, and also I'll throw Lachlan Brooks in that group as well, even Miluznic, even though he's older at 27. It's not the worst thing in the world that Adelaide's going to be viewed at by international teams and by players themselves as being a good platform to make a jump to a European move. I know, drawing parallels between my experiences when we at Melbourne City lost Aaron Moy, when we lost Daniel Arzani, I think we've gotten a good reputation about developing talent and preparing them for European football, and I think Adelaide's making those same steps where realistically, if you have someone like Paul Izzo, George Blackwood, a young player that hasn't quite cracked it in Europe, they will come back and look at Adelaide as being a really good platform for them to get regular game minutes and play at an elite level and get, secondary opportunities. And I think it's a tough thing, and it's always a really difficult balance to find, particularly in the A-League, about creating opportunities for players to depart and then also managing bulk departures each year, because we've seen Central Coast model doesn't work, but I think Adelaide is striking a really good balance. The biggest compliment we can give Riley Mcgree is that he should be playing at a higher division, and he should have been challenging himself. It's great to see him in the championship. Fingers crossed there's a buyout clause in there if he is playing well, that he does get to stay at that level, because I think it is a step up from the MLS. Apologies to any of our US and Charlotte listeners. But even same for Miluznic, I wouldn't have thought at 27 many European sides were looking at him, but obviously there is that pathway there to get him across. Denmark's a good league. It's a strong league. There are Champions League places. Awan Bill, I think, is another level again, and he's a player that plays week in, week out in that competition. So yeah, good to see that Adelaide is providing that pathway to get players international football, particularly this year as well, where we are learning quite a bit that international transfers are going to be very, very difficult both in and out of the country for the foreseeable future as we work out what the world looks like from a footballing sense after the pandemic. We are going to take a quick break from the playing group, though. We're going to jump into our big question. All right, gents, so the big question that I asked for both of you was, how far can South Australian talent carry Adelaide? Now, as we were kind of going through and putting our notes together for this particular week and this particular podcast, recapping that 2015-2016 Premiership Championship double winning season, we've already mentioned in the run-through that it had a very Spanish core to it, and really it was, I think, the season where Adelaide got their international recruitment as right as they've ever gotten it in any of the seasons. And that's a big call considering some of the big names that have played for Adelaide from international and visa capacity. What they've kind of moved to and what they've moved from both coaching, and we'll talk about that further in a moment, but also from a playing group, is trying to have consistent South Australian talent in that squad, which is, I think, very different to the way that their premiership and title winning side was put together. I think Stefan Moore was maybe the only starting player in that grand final team that was actually South Australian born and bred. A few others had been in and around that area for a while. The question that I want to ask you guys is, how far can South Australian talent carry Adelaide? And do you see that as being a realistic pathway to not just, as we've spoken about previously, becoming like a development club for players to get international moves, but really becoming a team that consistently challenges at the top end of the table and for titles year in, year out, instead of on the occasional season? Matt, I'll let you have the run through first at this one. How far can the SA talent carry Adelaide?
Look, I know this is a podcast and you want to fill it out with content, but it's a really simple answer. I mean, all the way. I mean, jokes aside, I mean, the likes of the Toure brothers, we've got Louis Dorigo, which we've got a fanboy here, obviously Stefan Moore, Jordan Elsey, we've got
Ryan Straney.
Straney, lots of guys who have been developed locally. who are already showing their best. Others who have been around for a while, obviously Elsie, Kiddo, those guys are in and around the mix at all times. Local lads. And then going to the end of the spectrum, you've got Michael Moran, who's building a house up in the hills. He's going to be here until he retires. He's still got his bit to play. I think that mix of bit of experience within the A-League and through the NPL ranks and just that growth, I think we're well positioned to perform well. Whether it's enough to take premierships this year or the next year, it's a bit hard to really agree with. Perhaps even trying to be rational about it. But then you just need one or two of them to have a breakout season. Having a look at our Santoro, for instance, he's the obvious go-to young breakout player. Like, who the heck is this guy suddenly scoring goals in the FFA Cup and winning games single-handedly? Injury certainly hampered him with the foot injury that he sustained during the Ollie Roos games. But I think watching him come back and watching him train today, he's fit, he's moving well. I don't think there's any restriction for him. So, have that breakout season, have him come in and score 10, 12, 15 goals, and suddenly he's that next player across to Europe because he's young, he's a proven goal scorer. And if you catch everybody performing right at the right time, then that's when perhaps really good performances in the A-League will happen. I think there's a lot to happen to suddenly win premierships and win trophies with a youth setup. The idea of Adelaide being a selling club is logical from a business sense, but I think it's sensible from a growth perspective. I think if any club in Australia doesn't think that they're a selling club, they're fooling themselves, and they're not going to have strength or longevity. We mentioned Central Coast not quite hitting the mark in the past, but recently, but in the past, they have. In the past, you look at some of the players they've developed and moved away, and they've obviously let that model break apart somewhat. Melbourne City have got the old City group that they can essentially buy, sell, trade within, and you become a City player, and maybe you stay a City player for the rest of your career. You've got that potential to move up and down the tiers. Every club should be selling. Every club should end any 5-year period in a positive balance, and that should be enough to fund A-League moving forward.
Yeah, I think the fascinating part you touched on there is like the funding, and we do want to see A-League clubs running in a sustainable financial model. And the tough part about being a selling club, and I think one of the things that we're seeing with Central Coast is the comparison, is that talent factory isn't always guaranteed. You're not always guaranteed year on year to have that consistent $1 million transfer. And I don't think any clubs are necessarily reliant on that, but that key period for Central Coast obviously hasn't continued. And the things that they were doing well from their footballing scouting network for young players and their development area has obviously changed quite a bit with new ownership and new coaches and all that sort of stuff. I do have a follow-up question. I'll come back to it in a moment for you. But Bill, same question to yourself. How far can South Australian talent carry the Adelaide as far as you're concerned?
Well, I think in terms of ambition, definitely all the way. I think is obviously the easy answer, and albeit, and some of the players have spoken recently, and the goal for this season is to win the league. Whether that is realistic or not, I'm not entirely sure. But I think the club's in a really exciting place at the moment. It's a very transitional phase, and if you go through that members forum and listen to it, which I've been quoting a lot, purely because I think it's got so many gems and so much exciting information for Reds fans in it. They spoke about how we've been a club that's sort of probably catered to the European managers we've had in the last few years and been very much this season based. We'll see what happens this season, and then we'll worry about next season. Sort of when next season comes, I think sort of in terms of the football focus for the club in the last few years, which has had varying degrees of success, obviously. But I think I don't think it's really a viable model long term. I think now. Looking to the South Australian talent, there's clearly a long-term plan there. and even from the club in terms of other perspectives, I mean, off the football field, there's much more of a long-term plan that we've seen from our CEO, and I think the transparency that we've gotten in the last few months has been really, really exciting. So I definitely think there's plenty of young talent there, and the quote I quite liked from Bruce Jitte on Thursday night was he said, if it's good enough for Ajax to be a selling club, then it's definitely good enough for Adelaide United. Ajax obviously still a European giant, still competing at the top of the Eredivisie every season. Champions League semi-final not too long ago. Obviously, the European football landscape is very different to the Australian football landscape, but I think there's a model there that's definitely viable long term, and that probably most Australian clubs should look at, because there's obviously periods of success. There may be quieter periods, but I still think I don't think it's a bad thing for the league, because the reality is we don't have the pull of the Premier League, La Liga, Bundesliga, the Champions League. It's just not what Australian football is. But I think the other exciting thing about having so much South Australian talent is I think it actually could potentially be a very good selling point for the club to try and convince more people to come to games and that sort of thing, because it's easy, people say watch the cricket or watch the footy to go, there's when I say footy I mean AFL, just for clarification, to go, look, that boy's a South Australian boy, we really want to get behind him, that sort of thing. If we've got a whole, potentially a whole 11 of South Australian players, that's multiplied by 11. So I think it can be potentially a very, very good, way to bring South Australians together in support of Adelaide United. So I think it's very exciting in that respect. So I haven't really talked much about on the field, but in terms of off the field, it's very exciting. And then I think the on the field stuff comes after that as well. So I think either way, I think it's very exciting, whichever way you look at it.
Yeah,
go
for it, Matt. Sorry.
About Carl Veart, formerly in the youth setup of Adelaide United, so it's showing that development of coaches as well. I mean, in terms of coaching age, and he's a young coach as well, so in some ways that's a youth development in itself in the coaching squad, bringing in former players and recently former players, showing continued development professionally for coaching staff. But just with Carl Veart coming across from the youth setup, he's seen the divide that's previously existed between the youth team, the W League team, and the A League team, and they're working really hard to bring all that together, having more backroom staff to link all of them together, to also have a continuity on strategy and tactics, so that when suddenly the left back of Adelaide United gets injured and we're pulling up a 19-year-old from the youth setup, so right, you're playing left back, it might be a little bit different to what we were doing last weekend in the youth setup, but generally speaking, you know what the job is. And that continuity and that culture of football between the youth setup to the senior setup means the transition won't be as difficult, and there isn't this gaping chasm in the understanding between the youth players and the senior players. And I think then that will help that transition as those youth players develop enough that they're quality to be in the A-League naturally. So I think long term, Carl Veart is the right idea, the right mentality, and that's how the club's doing things looking forward.
Yeah, sorry, Bill, go for it.
Sorry, just to close on and probably give a proper answer to your question as to how far South Australian talent can actually carry Adelaide United. I think my view on it is that because we're in this transitional phase, I think maybe this season and the next two seasons we may not maybe potentially go as far as we'd like in the league and the cup, but I think even if we don't have that early success, I'm personally as a fan willing to accept that in terms of, for the long-term goal. I think maybe we may not see short-term success. That might be the reality of it, and it's a different model to what we've had as a club in the past. But I think the long-term future is a much bigger picture, and it's very exciting. So I think there's potential for success immediately, but if that doesn't come, I suppose that the bigger picture definitely comes into play there.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk more about Carl Veart and the footballing department in a moment. But the counterpoint that I kind of wanted to come back to you guys on is that and I use this as a big credit for Adelaide, is that a lot of their international signings they've got right. And what I mean by that is they've got the likes of Casio, Marcos Flores, I've nearly forgotten his name, Marcelo Carusca, Michael Yakerson, all international players that came to the A-League and decided to stay in Adelaide. Beyond the end of their playing careers, they've looked at it as being a place they want to try and raise their families, which is always a great counteracting point to people calling it a pissant town on Twitter. They say, well, no, it's not really, because all these players are still here. So I think that's a huge credit that they had in their international recruitment, that they're not necessarily building, like a huge city base where you're going to get lost in the shuffle. It is, a close-knit town. It is a close-knit community representing Adelaide in and around that football club, and it is a place that you can raise a family and start to build a life above and beyond football. Do you think there is a risk if Adelaide starts developing its reputation as being, let's say as broadly as possible, the Ajax of the A-League, and working towards development of local players, that they do lose some of that allure that they've previously had in terms of their international player recruitment? Matt, question to you first, mate. How do you think they're going to strike a balance if they're going to be moving towards this development model of continuing to bring in high quality additions for international and visa players into the A-League?
I guess that's going to come down to the management group to work hard to strike that balance. You've got to understand the quality that you've got in the squad, the quality you've got coming up through the youth. You don't just look at Mohamed Toure, for instance, and go, well, one day he'll suddenly jump onto the scene. Something Alan Bruce and others have alluded to is they don't suddenly appear on the screen. They're not suddenly here on the field and performing. They've worked from the age of 5 to become the footballers they are. They've had support and growth and development all the way through. So we know they're coming. But we know 3 years ago that that we're going to see Louis Dorigo doing what he's doing now, playing that defensive midfield role. We watched him play in the NPL, in the JPL. We watched him do this. We knew he was going to do this, and here he is. It comes as a surprise to people who aren't paying attention, and the coaching staff are paying attention. So I think if you are clever in how you look to recruit from your international players, you're going to do so with that information in mind. You're going, look, we haven't got a great stock of strikers coming through. So where are we going to target? We're going to look to Europe or to Asia to find that striker that we know we haven't got coming through. So I think if they're smart and clever about it, which I think they will be, they'll continue trying to find that right person that fits what they know they'll need based on what they've already got.
Yeah, future spoilers because we'll get to it in a moment. But to date, one international signing, and I've just realised he's not on my list, so I'll talk about that. Remind me when we get to the players in that I've got to add that one back in. But only one international signing coming in so far this season. It does kind of mark the departure that you guys have already been talking about. Bill, as far as international recruitment is concerned, I'll change the question slightly for you because I think you and Matt will probably touch on the same points. But if you're going with that academy development model, do you think that changes the way international players will be brought into the club? And do you think that changes their role in the development? Well, future spoilers, I'll just pull the Band-Aid off and we'll mention him. But Javi Lopez, who's come across from a long period in La Liga, very experienced defender. Michael Jakobsen, already in the squad, also very experienced European defender. Do you see their roles changing to try and develop a younger squad in the future?
I think, while the model is obviously a bit of a selling players off eventually and developing players, I don't think it can be forgotten that at the end of the day, we're still going to try and win the league. We're going to go out and try and win the FFA Cup. But just because we're going to try and develop players, that doesn't mean we're going to throw results out the window. Because ultimately, football is a result-based business, and we see that whether it be European football or Australian football, coaches can get sacked pretty easily now. But I think ultimately, I don't think our international recruitment will change too much. What I think will be different now is we won't just go out and maybe try and target the best international player available. We'll look at ways we can complement our youth setup and probably use the international players now more as ways for the younger players to learn things and develop their game based upon what they're learning from the international players. But I also think at the end of the day, you can't go out and win the league or the cup with a team of 22-year-olds, 19-year-olds, whatever it may be. You still need to have that nice balance of experienced players in there. The likes of captain last season, Jakobsen. There's plenty of other players that still have experience in the A-League and or in any form of football, whatever league it may be. I think there's still plenty to complement all the young players coming through. So I don't think it will change too much, but it may be a bit more focused on complementing maybe the weaker parts of our side and that sort of thing. And I think ultimately it will change, but I don't see it being too big a concern.
Absolutely, more than fair responses, but I think the interesting part that we're going to find out, and this is one of those tough ones. Like, we'll probably have different answers to this exact question 12 months from now when we see how the team's performed, or 2 years from now when we see how the Calvert rebuilding phase, and I use that in loose air quotes because I think Adelaide does have a talented side, but it's one of those hindsight is 2021s. We know, looking back on the original seasons of the league itself, where they had Adelaide-based coaches and Adelaide-based players having that success, and then they kind of got away from it as the A-League itself as a league developed, and then they had international success with a Spanish manager, and then started leading heavily into that European coaching structure, and that didn't quite work out because not everyone's built the same and not everyone works it out. And Guillermo Moore was probably pretty close to the sack at various points in his coaching tenure before it finally clicked and they finally got it right. So there is no right or wrong answer to some of these questions, but I think the discussion points and doing comparative analysis sort of how different clubs are approaching what their next 2, 3, 4, 5 years looks like is fascinating to see. So we'll find out in the future how Adelaide is going to play out. We are going to segue back into some of our squad questions though. Contracts extended. You guys actually have quite a few contracts retained from last season, perhaps the most of any of the sides in the division itself. I'm going to run through them quickly. It's a bit of a long list, so just bear with me a moment. You've got goalkeepers Ethan Cox and Dakota Oshencham, probably butchering the pronunciation. By all means, let me know in the comment section below. Jordan Elsey, Ryan Kiddo, Michael Morone, Ryan Strain, Michael Jacobson, and Noah Smith on a youth scholarship contract make up the defensive unit. Louis Diorigo, who of course we've already mentioned on the back of Bill's shirt. If we eventually do a TRT shirt, we will send a free one to him with Bill Brooks on the back, just so he can get that support going the other way. Stefan Mork, who's the captain this season, we'll double back on that one. Joe Coletti, midfielder. Nathan Constandopoulos, midfielder. Attackers Al Hassan Toure, Ben Halloran, Kusini Yangi, Pacific Nyongabire, and Mohamed Toure, which is a formidable front line and a good little group of players. Of those contracted players, no future spoilers on the transfers that are coming in, who do you guys see as being the key player for this upcoming season, or potentially someone that you think might have a breakout year this season and really take their game to another level that we might not necessarily see? Bill, I'll let you have the first crack at this one, mate. Who of those contracted players is the highlight for you?
I think there's some real key players within that list of contracted players that will play a big part in us having a good season. Obviously, there's no secret of the talent of the two Toure brothers who we've still got, and obviously broke onto the scene last season, and I think it's going to be very exciting to see their development going forward. Easy for me to hop on the Louis Dorigo bus, but I was blown away by, obviously I probably in my own regret haven't followed the youth teams as closely as I maybe should have in the last few years. I think, it's a credit to the club that he was able to fit in so seamlessly last season, and obviously at times he was exposed, potentially, with the likes of Troisi and Mcgree being both heavily attacking midfielders in a midfield trio with him as a young defensive midfielder, got a bit of exposed at times, but I think it was so impressive how, I think he's 19, so his ability to adapt into the A-League and play senior football at that level, having been thrown in a little bit at the deep end by Verbeek. But I think Halloran's obviously still contracted, and he's been quality for us since he signed. And there's I could continue to list players. We've got, I think, an endless roster of talented players who we've managed to hang on to, and the likes of Jordan Elsey, who's now part of the leadership group as well. So I think there's some very exciting names in the players we've managed to retain over the off-season. So.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest compliment you can give Louis Diorigo is that number 6 shirt that you're wearing at the moment doesn't carry a small amount of weight as far as Adelaide United's history is concerned. Ross Aloisi, the original captain, wore that number. We've seen a variety of different big players in that squad wear that kit. So they've obviously got huge faith in him. And we mentioned it briefly in the player departures, Taras Gamolka. They're obviously looking at that defensive midfielder position and looking at him as being a key part of their structure, not just this season, but into future seasons. And I think that might have helped inform the decision about Gamolka's departure and moving across to Melbourne City, where we do need someone in that position. Really, he's got, a better chance, which is a weird thing to say, trying to get ahead of Aidan O'Neill this season to start City's midfield than he did getting ahead of Louis Dorigo, which I give as a huge compliment. Same question for yourself, Matt. Anyone that you think jumps out in that playing group as being a key player for the season ahead and someone that you might see have a breakout year?
Yeah, look, I think Stefan Mork will make or break his whole career almost on the back of this year. Being still a young player, he's going to be looked to basically manage that midfield, I think, week in, week out. Really control everything that comes out in terms of attacking options. I think a lot of it's going to come through him. The captaincy on the arm as well puts a little pressure on him. Though everything I've seen so far, he's really taken to that very well. I think he'll be fairly relaxed about it, and with the other players around him. Certainly, still having Jakobsen still in the mix there as a former captain. I think can only support him. Halloran's going to be incredibly influential, I think, in continuing to create things down the right wing in particular. Whole family's a big fan of Ryan Kiddo as well. I think the largely underrated player was put in a very tricky situation last year, trying to balance Michael Maria, who was one of, speaking of international imports, one of our bigger flops ever. The style that he was asked to play last year is, I think, what caught them both out. Exposed them a lot by pushing forward in the left back position. So I'm hoping Kiddo, who's actually won a golden boot for Adelaide United in years past, will get freedom to move forward. So I think we'll see a bit more from him this year as well. And I'm hoping we do, because I think there's a lot of potential still. You could just about fill the 11 and be fairly happy with your starting 11 there from your retained players. I think that says a fair bit about what they've managed to do in retaining the squad.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched on Stefan Mork. I think he's 25 now, could be 26. I'm happy to be corrected in the comment section below, but really, he should be coming into his prime. And it's one of those scenarios where a couple of bad moves that didn't see him playing that much football, and obviously a couple of injuries which were out of his control. Like his move to the Eredivisie was ill-timed because he didn't get the playing time he needed at a key part of his career after departing, following the 2015-2016 grand final triumph, where he was looking like an absolute world beater in that Adelaide team, and that really killed his momentum, I think, not playing consistent football after hitting that crush. And then he came back and went to, I think, an ill-advised move to Brisbane, where it didn't quite work out for him the same way. You'll see in our graphic he's still wearing his Brisbane kit because we don't have an updated one yet. But obviously an Adelaide boy, I will not forget him holding up that 2-0 finger to the Melbourne City fans not long after leaving the club, which, fair credit to him. He did well with the platform and he did very well in that side and was a big catalyst in that end-of-season run that saw you guys finish as premiers. But I think for him, a huge, huge turning point in his career is this season and how he performs. He's either going to become what we've all kind of hoped he would be for a long time, a very, very good midfield general, and it'll be interesting to see how his overall play changes if he gets away from being that box-to-box player that he's been previously and becomes more of a creative hub. But yeah, an absolutely huge one for him, and I think when we talk through the lineups in a moment, we will perhaps look at him as being one of the key players that a lot of Adelaide's success this season may hinge upon in terms of that midfield creativity. But excellent answers from you both. Thank you as always. We now move into perhaps the more exciting element, the transfers in. The mind wanders. Our imaginations get away from us sometimes when we think about potential transfers coming in. We're going to run through these quickly. First, two goalkeepers joining, James Delianov and Joe Gauci. Delianov having previously been at Melbourne City and Western United, but not yet cracking into starting goalkeeper positions. We'll talk about that more a little bit in a moment. George Timothea joins, a long-time Schalke Academy defender, made first-team appearances for them, most recently played at Zulte Waregem in Belgium. Dominic Costanzo, interestingly, Ange Costanzo's son. Ange Costanzo was a key part of the inaugural Adelaide United A-League squad. Yaya Dukali, a young player from Melbourne City, comes across. Tommy Juric, probably the big marquee signing, makes his return, perhaps some would say overdue after his career stalled for the last few years, returning from Europe. And then the last one, who I forgot to put on the list, apologies for the run sheet, is ex-Espanyol captain Javi Lopez, who returns after playing about 400 games in La Liga. So he's got quite the European pedigree and experience. Thoughts on those transfers in? Who do you guys see as being the big one, and who do you think might be the surprise package? Matt, I'll go to you first on this one.
Look, having Gabby Lopez join is extraordinary. He's played his entire professional career at Espanyol, over 250 La Liga games, plus cups, captain the side. I mean, it's just an extraordinary career that he's had, and when he was let go by them, or when he chose to leave, I believe, apparently we can credit some former players of ours to saying, hey, I know a club that's looking for players down in Adelaide. It's a really nice spot. I chat to this guy, and anyway, conversation with Bruce, and evidently Bruce says it is the easiest signing he's ever had to make. It was already sold to him by Sayers. It just was a phone call And yeah, it was done. So to have him, welcome him there is amazing. I believe he arrives in Adelaide tomorrow, so he'll be training with the squad. And there's probably 6 or 7 training sessions left before the first game. So it'll be interesting to see where he slots in and when. Tommy Urick, the obvious one as well. I mean, he's got to become that centre man that we look to for goals. Not to put the mocks on him, but I think anything short of 10 goals would be seen as a failure for his return. It's pure and simple. I think you expect goals from Tommy coming in, and I think he expects the same. He was loving being out of quarantine. First training session this morning at the club, so it was good. See Joe Coletti, he's showing a lot of promise. Very fast little central midfielder there. He might get some chances in there as well. But interestingly, I think James Delinov is wearing the number 1 shirt. So it's clear who's going to become the first pick. We've got 4 goalkeepers named in our main squad, and there's been a lot of discussion as to who's going to get that number 1 shirt. He was wearing the number 1 shirt during training today, and Bruce certainly indicated that, and as of the recent trial games. So it looks like he'll get his chance. So we'll see what he can do under that incredible tutelage of Eugene Kalakovic, the coaching squad. So I think some very exciting moves. A lot of returning Australians, but I don't think it's such a bad thing, because they're coming back with experience.
Yeah, I mean, look, worst case scenario, the fullback option, Big Huge could probably put the gloves back on and play for another 2 or 3 seasons if you desperately needed him to, but obviously, hopefully he's enjoying his retirement. Same question for yourself, Bill. Who do you think jumps out from their players in, and who are you most excited about seeing playing in the upcoming season?
Well, for me, I think one of the big ones is, it's no secret we had struggles defensively at times last season, particularly I think early 2020. I think we shipped 5 against Western United, a 3 against Newcastle, and sort of successive performances like 5 against Western Sydney on your holiday trip.
Yeah, shut up.
I think we need to bring up that picture at some point during the podcast.
Do not send it to me.
I'll have to help you out with that, Shaun.
Yeah, send it to me, Bill. I'll nominate. I'll do you a favour though, Matt. I'll nominate it for the Hall of Fame or something next week. So we'll cast it in a positive light. I don't know if you guys have seen this. I think it's a couple of podcasts ago. There's a photo of Bran that was captured on Fox Sports, and they've used it in about 15 different media packages about the 4-0 defeat in the FFA Cup final, and he looks absolutely miserable. So, it's a long-running theme that all of us just look absolutely devastated on camera if we're on Fox Sports. So, yeah, no dramas with that one, Bill, but make sure you send that through to me. Slack me a DM, and I'll get that sorted.
That can definitely be arranged.
Perfect.
But yeah, I think, obviously, it was no secret we were, defensively poor at times last season. So I think, for me, Timothy is an extremely exciting signing. He comes with some pedigree and was good enough for Schalke to want to sign at some point from, I think he was actually at an NPL club when he signed Sydney Olympic, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. Feel free to roast me on Twitter or in the comments. That's fine. I think he comes with plenty of pedigree, obviously, and played out a 0-0 draw in Stuttgart. I think it was his Bundesliga debut, so kept a clean sheet in the Bundesliga. And so I think he's exciting to bring in as an option. If something does sort of go wrong defensively, as another option is to just LC and Jakobsen. And I think we struggled with centre backs for the last few years. So to shore up that position, and also with the option of Javi Lopez, who's obviously Matt's touched on his experience, I think is another really exciting option for us. So that's the thing. I think it's nice to have defensive options, especially at centre back, which I don't think we've had at Adelaide United for a few years now. And I think it's good because it provides competition those centre back places, and they're not so nailed on. It probably means that the other guys will have to try a bit harder to keep their spots. So it's obviously exciting. Tommy Uric, I might touch on him a bit later with my 11. Just some of the comments I maybe have on that. Admittedly, I've heard plenty of good things about Joe Coletti, but I haven't done much research on him and don't know much about him. So I'm excited to see what he can do to show me what I should have been looking at previously. And obviously, I think the biggest question mark is probably our goalkeeper position with James Delinov, who's even Bia, I think, indicated the other night that he would be our first choice goalkeeper, at least at the start of the season. So it'd be nice to see him get his opportunity, and hopefully he can take that in his stride.
Boshenham's been showing really good stuff in the opportunities he's been given. So I think that question as to who really is going to get the number 1, get it and keep it is going to be up in the air. And I think it's going to create terrific competition between those two in particular, and can only really benefit the club.
Yeah, exactly. And like one of the things that we all harp on about every single year is young players getting opportunities in the league. And I think there's quite a few throughout the Adelaide squad and in the inbound transfers as well. And they're definitely, I think, looking locally to solve that goalkeeper scenario and solution. I know they were pretty heavily linked, and it's soccer Twitter, so it could be absolutely made up, with Mark Birigidi at Central Coast for a little while early on in the preseason, which I think would be a good move for both. But having said that, if they get it right with Delvinov, even Joe Gauci, I think, has got big raps on him as well as a slightly younger player. If they get it right with one of them, they are potentially going to have the next goalkeeper they had for the next 10 years. Adelaide have been blessed by the fact they've had arguably, I think, the best goalkeeper in A-League history for a decade in Eugene Galekovic, where they haven't had to worry about that position each year. But yeah, I think if they get it right, fantastic news for them. Even if they don't, they have got that depth of field and that depth of roster now where they can provide a few different options and give a few different young players opportunities. And we are, of course, not miles away from the January transfer window, and you've got visa spots open, and you've got a bunch of other places in the squad still available. So, it's not going to kill you in any stretch. But I think some smart plays, if we are following that Australian recruitment strategy that we've already talked about to death, and I think smart recruitment from their one international player to hopefully develop the next generation of Adelaide United defenders in that level with his experience. But the other thing I've asked you gentlemen to do, and we do this with each of our weeks, is put our money where our mouth is and try and put together our expected or preferred lineups, which always gives us some fascinating stuff. We're going to jump into those now and have a quick look. Now, first up, Matt, as our external guest, I asked you to put together your dream lineup, and you came back and gave us a window into your soul with this chaos in the midfield here. But talk us through this lineup. You've gone with, I think you described it as a 4-1-3-1-1. It's kind of a 4-5-1. It kind of, we have spoken about separately, could develop into a 4-4-2 with a midfield diamond. Walk me through this starting 11 and what you think for each of the positions.
I think if it's a window into my soul, I'm not sure if it's saying I'm complex and interesting or whether it says I'm just can I swear, a mess?
Yeah.
Can I chip in?
Yeah, no, you can say whatever the fuck you want. Like the green light on swearing, green light on whatever you need. This content is not developed or marketed towards kids. So, yeah, you do whatever you need to do.
Held back so far. I'm impressed.
It'll be the first time. Look, next time I promise I'll bring it out. Look, Delvinov I think was a clear pick for me from having seen his performances in the trial games and just having heard from where Bruce was sitting. But my instinct actually went with Oshingham initially, just having seen him in person as well. So, look, I think either of those boys picked in the number one spot, I'm quite happy with. Defensively, I was torn with Timo whether he was going to place Elsie in the centre back. Lopez is going to depend on perhaps his fitness. Certainly early season, we won't see him the first couple of games. So I think Timo will be a clear centre back with Elsie there. But then I get confused as to where Yaku's going to sit in the back four. Strains, for me, cemented that right back position for as long as he wants it. He's a real dynamic player back there, really solid. I wouldn't want anybody else there at this point in time. If push comes to the shove, Moran needed to step in there. I'd be pretty happy with that as a backup too. So Dorigo, that number 6 role, sitting in the defensive midfield, formed this bizarre triangle of mine in the middle there, with Mork sitting in front, giving Mork that opportunity to be the box to box, but really thinking him more as a pushing forward, controlling playmaker. I've put Kiddo on his left wing, which is in seasons past has been his preferred position, with the number 7 on his back. It makes it fairly obvious where he likes to be. Halloran on that sort of that right wing, I think he's demonstrated where he likes to be and how he can create and still cut inside. He's very good at that movement inside as well, and linking in with Hassan and Uric up the front. So I see Uric as that real controlling centre forward, that guy who should be able to turn on a dime and just hit the ball knowing where the goals are, not having to do a lot of movement but create the movement, controlling, distributing. Let our Hassan Toure do the running. We know he's good at that. We know he finds himself in the position. We know he can find the ball at his feet and will just take that instinctive crack when he's facing the goal, not necessarily quite as attuned to turning whereas I think Jurek is going to be finding himself being able to turn and position and pivot a little better. So the way I see them playing is one in behind the other rather than side by side. And that being said, I don't know whether we're going to see a single striker or whether he's going to want to play two up front with it. It's going to be interesting how he plays it. Yeah, I think probably a few questions as to my selections there, but it's where I sit.
I don't hate it, full disclosure, and this stuff's my jam. My background is playing Football Manager, so putting lineups together for different clubs, like that's what I do. That's my world. So I don't hate this formation, Matt. And I didn't look at it and be like, where is your header? I think there are some very strong players out there. I think the Glenelg Jesus on the right wing is going to have a huge season for Halloran. I think Stefan Mork, we've already mentioned big stuff from him. And the one that we haven't mentioned really is Tommy Juric. I think the same way that we've spoken about Lopez at the back and potentially taking on more of a mentorship role for some of the younger players in that squad, I think maybe even Tommy Juric is going to be a sensible decision to hopefully guide Al Hassan Toure and Mohamed Toure in their development. Like, this is another conversation, and I don't know his nature and what he's like and anything like that. This is purely speculation outside looking in. I think he probably should have come back to the A-League 2 or 3 years ago, because I think particularly at the striking position, you need to be playing games, you need to be finding the back of the net to remain. That's what increases your value, that's what increases your worth. And he's a player that should have been, when he left Adelaide the first time, moving on to bigger and better things. Obviously fantastic for Western Sydney, obviously fantastic in the 2015 Asian Cup triumph, and hasn't played a whole lot of football or scored a whole lot of goals since. So we're now 5 years on from that, which is crazy to think about. But, you know, like he should have pulled this trigger a lot earlier. I do hope he gets back to good form. We want to see our best players doing well, particularly our Australian players. But even if he doesn't, there's surely lessons that he's learned from European football and his journey to that he can then impart on Toure and hopefully lead that same sort of development role. It wouldn't shock me if these two are competing for a starting berth, and it wouldn't shock me if we see the first month of the year, or month of the season, I should say, the Toure brothers more involved than Juric as he gets back into full fitness and back into regular football. So I think there's a lot to be said about this shape and this lineup. But Bill, I want to get your thoughts. You guys have gone with very different structures. Before we go to yours, give me a chance to critique Matt's a little bit here. You can back away from him a little bit and get out at arm's length if you're going to say anything too controversial. But what are some of your thoughts on the squad that he's put together, and where do you think some changes or perhaps some lack of depth may exist?
Yeah, I think for me, I've got several players in very similar positions to what Matt's gone with. I haven't gone with the same formation. I think that the two up top sort of thing is interesting, even if it is one behind the other. I think those, Hassan Toure and Tommy Juric, actually their attributes suit each other because they're two sort of different strikers, and I think it suits them to play together. So that's potentially an option that could be looked at. I'm not sure if it's going to go with two strikers. I don't know why. I'm just something deep inside me that makes me think he's going to go with one up top. But I think the options there are very exciting. I think go back on the wing, I almost prefer. Obviously, I think in Marco Kurtz's first season for us, he was a Golden Boot winner. Not that he had much competition, admittedly, but you can't take a Golden Boot away from someone. It's something that I'm sure he'll hold on to for the rest of his career. And Mork and Dorigo in midfield, I think they're two exceptional players, and I think there's nothing wrong with those two being picked. And I still think it's a very good side, regardless of I've probably gone with something a bit different in my 11.
All right, cool. Well, Matt, I'm going to give you a chance to go back on Bill's 11 as well, so don't stress. You don't have to bite your tongue for too long, but we're going to jump into that one now. So looking at your shape, Bill, you've gone with more of a conventional 4-3-3. Obviously, both are very similar. It's just slightly different positioning where you've put a few different players. I won't make you recap the entire thing because there are quite a few different similar changes, but let's just focus on the players that you've brought into the starting lineup at their expense. I think, interestingly, at centre-back, you've gone with Timothy and Jakobsen as a defensive partnership. Adelaide United, I'm just realising as I look at this, they've got 3 different left-sided centre-backs, which I love. I love a left-sided centre-back. It'll be interesting to see how they all play together. You've also gone with Noah Smith at left back as a big change. You've got Dorigo and Mork, as you've already mentioned, but gone with Nathan Constandopoulos as the third midfielder. And then you've gone with Nia Gambire as the left winger and Toure leading the line up top with Juric not in the squad at all. Talk us through some of those changes and talk us through the rationale behind using this shape and what I think is perhaps a more youthful Adelaide United lineup.
I think just quickly to completely ignore your question, I think just as Matt touched on, I think both those players down that right side are, I think they're nailed on in their positions, and that's why I think Strain and Halloran particularly have kept their places just quickly. But I've gone with a slightly different setup. Obviously, I've gone with one up top, and I think one of the big probably things that may confuse some people, as I've omitted Tommy Juric. Admittedly, there's some recency bias there in respect of I've watched him for the Socceroos for the last few years and been increasingly frustrated at his tendency to go missing at times. But I'm more than happy to be proven wrong on that one, and I think that definitely long-term he can still score plenty of goals for us. But I think definitely, as you touched on also, as he comes back to fitness, we could definitely see Hassan Toure starting up there for the start of the season. I went Mcgree at left wing instead of Matt's Ryan Kiddo, because I was just blown away by his performances in the post-lockdown hub, in the back end of last season. I think it was quite spectacular, and we've seen flashes of his brilliance in the past in very, very brief appearances. So I think I'd love to see him get that opportunity. I think another contender for that position though is Mohamed Toure. We saw obviously last season he broke onto the scene, and there's still no denying his talent. And I think there's going to be plenty of opportunities on that left wing. And I think I definitely wouldn't complain seeing Ryan Kiddo there either. I think it's definitely better suited to him than playing left back, which will lead me into why I chose Noah Smith at left back. And I don't know. Obviously, Jakobsen's a left-footed player and a left-footed, left-sided defender, but I think I prefer him in the middle. His leadership traits and I think the stability he brings to the centre of our defence, I just prefer him there. I think the glimpses we've seen from Noah Smith, I think, are quite exciting. I think he's potentially a capable player for a long time, whether it be in an Adelaide United shirt or we do follow that model that we've bashed to death in this podcast, and he does get a move somewhere else. But I think this is his season to maybe have a crack at nailing down a left-back spot in the A-League, because I don't think there's ultimately too much competition for him. And I think to bash Ryan Kiddo, because I do quite like him, and his Golden Boot season was quite memorable for me, because it was one of my first seasons really following the club. I think he's probably not suited to left-back, and I think we saw it many times last season. He got exposed as a result of that. And obviously, my centre-back pairing, I went with Timotheu and completely omitted vice-captain Jordan Elsey. But I think that's very much going to change throughout the season. Those two centre-back positions will very much be a case-by-case basis, who's training best. And that's why I'm so excited, because, like I said earlier in the podcast, I mentioned that we haven't had competition at centre-back for a long time. So I'm excited to see potential changes there. And, obviously, Javi Lopez will come in that discussion. I dropped Jordan Elsey. So, I think there's plenty to be excited about there. And then, obviously, my midfield, I went a bit different with the three-man midfield, and to reaffirm my love for Louis Dorigo, put him in as the sixth, because I could talk all day about how impressed I was with him last season. He just genuinely blew me away, breaking onto the scene like he did, partially due to my own ignorance, but I think he was incredible. So I put in Nathan Constandopoulos, who's come back from an ACL injury, and I think he was showing some of the best football he's shown in his career leading up into that ACL injury. He scored a particularly impressive goal against Western United towards the end of the pre-lockdown, and I really think he showed some exciting stuff for us. And admittedly, my sister's quite a fan of him, so he gets a bit of a boost in that respect. He's her favourite player. So then obviously Captain Stefan Morgan, you can't drop him. Not that I was ever considering it, because I've loved having him back at the club. Obviously, he came back in January, and I think he's been phenomenal. I couldn't speak more highly of what he's done so far, and I think giving him the captaincy is really exciting. And now that Troisi's gone, I think that creative role is his to make his own. And I think we spoke earlier about how it's very much a make or break season for him, potentially with the responsibility he can give to the captaincy and sort of the point he's at in his career. So I think if things go well, I think it's very exciting. But with that 11, there's a lot of asterisks in terms of, I think there's a lot of those positions that could easily change week in, week out, with it being striker, left winger. I think there's plenty of options. The centre back options, even in the midfield, we've got obviously Joe Coletti, I've omitted. So goalkeeper as well. I went with Delianov, but there's plenty of options in that respect. So I don't think that's nailed on by any extent of the imagination, and I'm happy to see any of the other players that I omitted, because I believe that we've definitely got the capability in that respect to rotate those players, because we've got enough players who are good enough to play in our 11. So.
Yeah, I think spoilers for future season previews or past season previews if you haven't watched them yet, but I think there's gaps starting to form in the league. I think there's two sides that their squads are clearly deeper and bigger and better than the two others. We'll talk about them later on. But then there's also like a gap between, I think, the bottom four clubs as well, where you can actually really struggle to put together a strong-looking 11. I think the fact that the two of you have put together very different makeups and very different lineups, and they're all players that have A-League exposure and are A-League quality, probably says that Adelaide are getting it right in terms of their depth. Even if those players are younger, there is going to be a push, I think. Really, probably the only nailed down spots that you guys have gone with are the right side that you said, Haller and Strain, who I think Strain's finally figured out what position he's going to play. I think there was various points throughout the off-season where it looked like maybe he would play in goal just to complete all the positions across the park for Adelaide United this season. But I think, yeah, like it's a good thing that you guys do have quite different lineups, because it does show that there is a strength in depth there, and it does show that there are going to be multiple players competing for multiple positions, which is what we always want to see. I think it's good for the club. Matt, I did make you wait on it, but Bill's dream team, anything that jumps out at you as being a particular weakness in this lineup, or anything that you look at that think potentially is an area that still needs to be improved, either via the transfer market or in the hopefully someone having a breakout year?
Like, I think Bill's just demonstrating his lack of football management experience. I think it's about time he got back into the old school football manager. But I couldn't really disagree with anything you said about the lineup. I'd be quite satisfied if that's the 11 who walked onto the park. I think, if we're having a one up front, Jurek and Toure have that competition. Constandopoulos, there's going to be a question mark over how he goes with the recovery from his knee. Absolutely got the quality, and I would dearly love to see him be an automatic walk-up, because, the quality he's showing is sensational. I think he's got the potential to be one of the next people to go overseas if he continues that form. I think Pacific Nyongabiri, I've got a real soft spot for him, having watched him play. Even to the point that we mates on Facebook, I really, really, really rate the guy. I think he's sensational. Again, I'd love to see some great performances from him. It's just a question of where exactly he's going to play. Is that going to be the right spot for him? And is he going to win it over some other options? And that's probably our weakest spot, if I have to be frank, that left wing, knowing what exactly we're going to do there. The absence of Milosnic, that pace there. We haven't, I don't think, got an obvious answer there. So I think if we're going to look to recruitment and be willing to push away the development of those players aside, I think that left wing, and in all honesty, that left side is where we really need to find some strength or develop players, and that might be where Motore comes in. But again, he's still a teenager. It'd be a lot to ask of him to step into that role and fill the boots that others haven't been able to. I'm excited to see how Timo goes in the centre back. I really want him to do really well. It'll be interesting to see how he transitions to the physicality of the A-League. I don't think he's a big guy. It'll be interesting to see whether he's used to coming up against other big players, other big strong forwards.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you guys had perhaps an additional layer of this challenge where there are so many players in this lineup that are versatile and can play multiple positions. So as you look at other different clubs, pre-season friendly lineups, and start to get more of a picture about where they're playing due to the rigidity of their playing group, I think like Ryan Strain could be playing anywhere across this lineup. It's impossible to tell what's actually going on with him. Similarly with Jakobsen, we don't know if he's playing on the left-hand side or in the centre or whatever else. And a few of the midfielders, it's hard to pick out that structure at the same time. So I think a big challenge. We'll probably learn a bit more as we get into the A-League season about how Calvert is going to set up and how he's going to play, which transitions nicely for us to jump back in and start talking about the management group as well. We will jump back in now to this regular view. So current manager, obviously Carl Vart, inaugural A-League player, did play as a number 10, could play up front. I'm not sure if he's going to favour those positions in his formation and style, but maybe there is a marker there from his playing history. Ross Aloisi, inaugural Adelaide United captain, as far as the A-League is concerned at least, played for a little bit there, has done a long internship as an assistant manager at both Brisbane Roar and Wellington Phoenix. Bruce Jitte, director of football, obviously ex-player, retired relatively young in playing terms, but has been in that role for a few seasons. Eugene Galekovic, goalkeeping coach, we've already mentioned. I'm bringing up all of these players because these are all players that have worn the Adelaide United shirt. We are seeing across the league this year, I think 9 of the 12 managers have played in the A-League at some point. Most of them have also played for the club that they're now going to be managing. We've seen a slightly different pathway with Steve Corica kind of coming through at Sydney, being a long-term youth coach and then an A-League assistant and then a manager and continuing that transition. They've gone with a similar structure, I think, at Adelaide as well. Carvart, as you've already mentioned, has been involved at Y-League football, youth level football, in and around the club as an A-League assistant manager and coach, and now is for the first time stepping into the manager role. How important do you guys think it is to have that representation within Adelaide United of players that know what it is to play for the club? And what do you think is an adequate pass mark for Carl Vart this season? Not necessarily where you're going to finish on the ladder, because we'll go through that in a moment, but where do you guys think the expectation should be set for a rookie coach in his first year at the helm? Bill, I'll let you have the first crack at this one, mate.
Yeah, so, if people aren't sick of me quoting the members forum the other night, I'm going to do it again here. But when they spoke about, the appointment of Carl and who they were looking for in a new coach, they actually did some, reflection and realised that there was something like only 3 of the championship winning sides have been coached by a foreign coach, which I think says a lot maybe about Australian football, and that it's a unique environment to adapt to, and a lot of the way European coaches may have done things in the past, or foreign coaches, maybe doesn't always stick in an A-League environment. And so they looked at that and went to go with an Australian coach in that respect. And I think in the touch of wanting to really embrace the fact that we're a South Australian club and look down that path, I think Coletti, it's obviously a great appointment, and just having Reds legends as part of our coaching stuff, I think can only help benefit the players, because they know what the standard is, they know what it means to wear this shirt, they know what it means to represent Adelaide United, and I think they'll help set that standard for the players. So I'm definitely happy with the coaching group, and I think obviously I think I mentioned earlier that I think potentially we may not see success short term with this new model we're going with. I think I'm just looking forward to seeing plenty of young players this season, and I've got no idea where we're going to finish on the ladder. Admittedly, I think it's very much dependent on how things go, because it's very much transitional for us. But I think past mark is it's exciting football, and integrating that South Australian talent for me. I don't think it's very much result based. Obviously, I'd be a bit disappointed if we finish bottom, but I think it's a very exciting season regardless. So.
I would be shocked if you finish bottom, just based on the quality of some of the other playing squads that we're going through, but that's fine. I've been proven wrong 600 times already on this channel. I could be proven wrong when we do our end of season review. Matt, I'm not sure if you remember back to the inaugural season of the A-League and that Adelaide squad. Carl Vart, Ross Aloisi, Michael Valkanis, Ange Costanzo, these players took absolutely no prisoners. They were the sort of people that you'd look across before kickoff and think, shit, I'm going to get kicked for the entire afternoon here. I'm in for a battle. What do you think we're going to see from Carl Vart from the management perspective? Obviously, I think you're probably, of the three of us, the best exposed to the youth league structure and the NPL structure in Adelaide. What should we expect for him from the upcoming season?
I think we're going to see some really exciting attacking football. I think, given he's a proven goal scorer himself, scored the inaugural goal in the A-League himself. He's a quietly spoken man. Some would say he's shy. I don't think. But he's not going to shy away from media. He's not going to shy away from sharing. I think he's going to go very quietly about it. I think he'll instill in his players the ideas that he's got really comfortably, because I think they'll just listen. I think he has that right demeanour about him. He doesn't need to be loud and audacious. He doesn't need to be aggressive. I think people know stock that he come from. They understand what he can do as a player and already what he's achieved as a youth coach, because some of those players are playing with him. There's some of the players he supported, the Tourés, and others have come through the academy that he was involved in. So the club's moving in very much an SA-centric direction. That's obvious the way with the player recruitment, but looking at the coaching staff, you've just listed the players or former players who are involved, and it goes even deeper than that. Nathan Cosme is the CEO of the club. The surname is obvious as to where he's related to. He still recounts some of the stupid stuff his dad did, but we all still remember Cosy quite fondly. But I'm really excited. Costanzo's still in and around the place because his lad's involved. Cristiano as well is his young lad, early teens. He's a very good, strong up-and-coming footballer who's coming through the youth ranks. And don't be surprised to see that name on the back of the shirt again. So, yeah, very, very exciting. Shortly after lockdown started, the club, or just prior, the club put out a survey and asked for feedback. And of course, as you can probably tell, I'm not too shy of sharing my thoughts, and so I did. The restrictions, they were able to invite 10 or 12 of us along, and we sat with the leadership group. This was prior to Coletti being announced. He was the interim at the time, and we sat there and we talked about what we want to see. They went through the survey results, and what we're seeing now is everything we heard at that small meeting. The local centric. We want a South Australian coach. We want to see Australian recruitment. We want to see youth development. The proof is in the pudding. We'll see what the results are. But so far, they're doing what they said they were going to do. The whole leadership team are doing exactly what they said they were going to do. They're responsive to the fans, doing what we expect. So I'm really excited to see what they keep doing, and I'm hoping that we're going to see a long tenure from Coletti. I'm hoping we continue to see Bruce in and around the place, Eugene hangs around. Having Ross back is terrific. Said good to him today, and he seemed really energetic and really excited to be here. So, bring it on. SA grade.
Yeah, look, it makes me feel like an old man that you're mentioning, like Carl Vart's kid, Michael Valkanis' kid, Ange Costanzo's kid, Cassio's kid are coming through at the Adelaide Youth Academy. That makes me feel absolutely ancient, but fantastic to see that they are building those roots. I think this isn't specific to Adelaide. This is, I'm saying this across the league. We've got a lot of first-year managers, and really, I think what's going to define the clubs that are building towards long-term futures and putting not long-term rebuilds, but going on a rebuilding journey is going to determine the pressure that they put on those coaches. The only thing that you'd hope is that they're going to see out this Carl Vert journey for the next 2 seasons, which I think is his contract as head manager. Run that contract out. Let's do the rebuild. If it's not working at the end of that period, then move on and do something different and pivot that way. We have to take the time to give players or give inaugural coaches or young coaches the opportunity to learn, and I'm sure they're going to make mistakes. I'm using Paddy Kisnorbo. I'm sure he's going to make mistakes this season as a first-team coach, even though he's done a similar journey coaching the W League side and the Youth League side. We've seen it with Steve Corica. That transition can be easy when you do it internally. Warren Moon's obviously got huge challenges. Richard Garcia's got challenges for Perth Glory. Grant Brebner is obviously going to have to try and change the way that Melbourne Victory are playing entirely. Their basic DNA is going to change this year based on the signings and the structures they've had in pre-season. So a lot of different clubs in a similar position. The only thing that we could ask for is time. And I think what you've mentioned with Cosmina, with Jute, the off-season people that are football people making football decisions, I think the reality is that Carl Vart's going to be given an opportunity to try and see through this plan all the way through to completion. And that's what we hope, that patience continues and there's no hair triggers pulled throughout the course of the year. We are now move off the field again. Obviously, we could probably talk about the expected lineups and the coaching groups for another hour and a half, but we want to try and get through as much as we can. Active support, obviously both of you, Bill, you've had exposure, and active support is really what drew you to the game. Matt, you're heavily involved with the Red Army, as we've already spoken about. If you were going to try and pitch not just the A-League, but specifically Adelaide United as well, to someone who hasn't been to a game, maybe a player that's followed Australian rules football, maybe someone that has recently moved to Adelaide, what would you try and do to convince them to give Adelaide United an opportunity, and how would you convince them to get a ticket and head through the gate to check out the game in round 1? Matt, I'll let you have the first crack at this one. Being our Red Army representative on the podcast today, what would your membership pitch or slogan be for someone who's maybe on the fence about joining this season?
I'd just buy them a ticket and make them come along. But I think look to the fan day that we held today. Had hundreds of people along, half of which were kids. To watch the first time ever the W League and A League squads train together on the same pitch was amazing. There was a lot of banter. You can't pretend it was a serious training session, but just to see those people all out there together having a great time, watching the kids get in and around. I mean, every player spent so much time signing shirts. My daughter's got both squads, coaching staff all covered her back, white strip back, almost no white left. It's amazing to see that. So you want to get people who weren't involved along to that, and then compare it to their the exposure to players, the exposure to coaching staff, other codes. And I don't think you can get that easy access to players, that easy access to who are essentially my children's heroes, and to be on essentially first name basis with them, for them to recognise you and to say, "Oh, hello, how you going?" I think it's an extraordinary thing for the A-League, and I think it's something we worked on promoting a few years ago. The A-League did as their promotion. Who's your team? They had that young lad who ended up choosing Melbourne City. I think from that perspective, the family-friendly atmosphere is important. which probably sounds a little bit strange coming from somebody who's active Bay. But we have a lot of children in the active Bay. We work on it being a family-friendly, if not a little sweary, location. A simple rule in our house is you can swear when you're at the football, or if it's the lyrics of a song. So, and my kids have grown up understanding that, so it shouldn't be too much of a put-off. But if you can get somebody through the gates, I think that's usually enough to convince them.
Worked on me.
Yeah, if you can get somebody through the gates, particularly if they've got a young family, I think that itself, the product, is enough to convince them that they'll be back. If not as members, they'll be back a couple of times a year. They will come back. They will come for the big games. They will lift that crowd from 8 or 10 or 12, to push back where we used to be, the 14s, 15s, 16s. And I think that's what we need to hopefully strive towards in the future. So obviously, Red Active membership is specialised. You can only get in the Active Bay if you've got that Red Active membership, which is unfortunate. It'd be nice if they could just open up the stands and let anybody stand where they want to. But in the absence of that, you can still be involved by joining the Red Army. Memberships are very cheap, and you get a UCAN exclusive shirt with the Red Army logo on it this year, which is going to be unveiled very soon. But every membership includes that, and a cheap drink at the Brompton as well, which is our pre-game march from. So there's a lot to be said for the A-League, but active support and involvement there's nothing quite like it.
I mean, you guys are a victim of your own success having to stand in that active bay. I remember the early Melbourne Heart days where we used to change ends with the team to go and stand at the other end of our goal. So, yeah, hopefully that is something that improves over time. But again, we've already mentioned quite a bit. I think the Coopers' experience and the active support they get is fantastic. Bill, obviously, you're actually on the other side of this coin because you are someone that has been recently recruited to the league. What from your experience and what you've learnt during that time would you like to see implemented more? And how would you try and get more people like yourself through the door to check out a game?
Well, I think Matt was exactly right earlier when he said, the sales pitch, and the way to get someone on board would be to buy a ticket and get them to a game, because that was exactly what happened with me in that 2-1 win against Melbourne City. The euphoria I felt from that I'd never felt before. So I think, but it wasn't just the winning goal. It was, in there, experiencing that atmosphere, something I'd never seen before. It was such a unique experience. I think it was a credit to the club and the Red Army. The way they do things is incredible. So. But the other thing I would add to that is I think with this new path we're going down with such heavily South Australian focus in our side, so many players will have been in our boat and grown up watching idolising the players that played before them for the club, and I think that plays a massive part. And then they understand exactly how these fans are feeling now, and it's so relatable. And on the Louis Garrigo love boat yet again. Just happened to bump into him in Glenelg, I think about a month and a half ago. He was just so lovely, having grown up being an Adelaide boy, and he was thrilled that I recognised him and had a great chat. So I think we'll see so much more of that, and players engaging with the fans, just knowing that this is that city, this is that state, this is who we are, this is Adelaide United.
Yeah, I mean, I met Bruno Fornaroli in a Kmart before Christmas a couple of years ago. I ran into Bart Scherkeveld on a night out. He was polite enough to not knock me out listening to my drunken ramblings about Melbourne City. So there's very, very few leagues around the world where you can actually say that you're going to get that exposure to the first team players and really that sense of community that comes with football. And of course, the match day experience at Coopers is absolutely phenomenal. If you can't go along to an A-League game and take some sort of positive experience out of a home win at Coopers, then there's probably no hope for you in terms of following the football into the future. But fantastic to hear both of your views and opinions. Round 1 fixtures are coming up, but really I just want to kind of keep this as vague as possible. Obviously, we know things are going to change week to week in the A-League, as football tends to do. But what are some of your season predictions and expectations for the year ahead? Bill, I'll let you have the first crack at this one. Season prediction, how do you think Adelaide United is going to fare, and where do you see as being a good pass mark for the season coming up?
I think, realistically, looking at the table and where I think we'll finish, I think there's a bit of to easily avoid any criticism to not settle on a specific position. I think it's potentially anywhere from 4th to maybe 8th and 9th, depending on, because it's a massive factor relying on some useful players in some key positions, and it will really depend on how they perform. The likes of Delhi and of our strikers, we haven't seen much of Urich scoring goals lately. So unless that changes, that could be a real problem for us. And Alessandro Torre is still learning. Obviously, midfield Dorigo, if he does play as a 6, he's still a very young player. And at times last season, he did get exposed. So, there's potential for things to go wrong, to put it that way. But I'm very excited, and I chance to maybe I feel like we may be on the edge of that, maybe the 6th, 5th, 7th position, but I think we can potentially push maybe as high as 4th, 3rd. So, but I definitely think probably around that 5th, 6th mark is probably where we'll end up at the end of the season. So, but I'm very excited regardless, because I think we're going to see some fantastic football. It may not always go our way, but I don't think we're ever going to be too disappointed with the product that's on display for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I think this is personal views coming into it, and I apologise because it's a platform for you guys, but I think there's a big group of sides that could potentially finish, I think, in that 3rd to 7th or 8th position, and a lot of that's just what are the answers to certain questions that they've got against them this season. Like Carl Vart, how's he going to handle the step up to being a manager? Some of the players that we've spoken about, like Juric and Mork, and even Doriga to an extent, if they have good seasons, there's no reason that I don't see Adelaide being a top 4 side, being a final set team. If it is a little bit longer a rebuild and it does take a little bit longer to get the style down and all that sort of stuff, you could see them drop down the division. But I do think they are trending in the right direction. I do think they are putting a good team together. Same question for yourself, Matt. What are your expectations for this season? What's your prediction for where they're going to finish? And what do you see as being an achievable pass mark for the year?
I think pass mark is finals football. Finals football, and more than that, I think it's that development of players. To see a transition from however the season starts to something better at the end. I think that's results are the most tangible and the most obvious. It's easy to graph results. However, if you can say, look, this is how the team formed together, grew together, developed the new process that Calvi and the club are working towards. When we talk about Calvi, what he's going to do, it's something that's been said by the club a few times, is they're actually trying to build a basic culture and then recruiting to fit into the culture that they want, rather than being coach-centric. So next coach that comes on, when Calvi gets sacked partway through this first season, as predicted in your little FIFA, your football manager, which devastated me. I almost started crying in the car listening to that. It's one of the most emotional things I've had in the media this year. Whoever steps in is going to be recruited to fit what the expectations of the management team are. That all being said, I think 4th is going to be good. If we get 4th, I'll be pretty happy just to see us push through the barrier that I think is going to be the Perths and perhaps the Western Uniteds, to make sure we hold our own against Newcastle, who I think could challenge just what others think. That's where we should be. It's going to come down to those breakout seasons. Rich scores goals, Torre improves, more controls the middle, Lopez does what he needs to do and builds the player base. Does what he needs to do. Delianov keeps some clean sheets. That's a lot needs to happen for us to finish high at 4th. But I will be the first one dancing on the roof if we are.
Look, nothing could shock us in the A-League. Like, as far as the meme league is concerned, anything could happen. We could see Sydney FC and Melbourne City capitulate. We could see Western United's legs run out. They've got an older squad. But, yeah, I mean, look, the reality is I'm probably going to come and to have a beer with you guys before the Adelaide away trip, and you'll win that game 4-0, and everything I've said today just goes flying out the window. But that's fine. Like, that's why football exists, is to prove me wrong. But, gents, unfortunately, and I feel like we could have probably talked for another hour and a half if time wasn't a factor, but that does bring us to the end of today's season preview. We will try and loop back again with you guys during the season, then towards the end of the season as well. I want to thank you both for joining us, of course. Fantastic to talk football with each of you. Bill, obviously, reserve team member. If people want to find out more of your content, if people want to check out your social media and stuff like that for any hot takes or cold opinions that you might have throughout the course of the year, where can people find more of your details?
Yeah, so my Twitter is just Bill Brooks 24. Admittedly, I haven't had much time to contribute much to the reserve team yet, but I'm really looking forward to upping that one now the season's getting started and I've got a little bit more free time on my hands. So, look forward to my terrible football opinions on there. I'm looking forward to engaging with everyone who's engaging with the reserve team. And then also, if you want to check out my Instagram, bill.brooks_24. Looking forward to, I'm more than happy to chat football with anyone. So if you want to chat football, hit me up. I could talk for weeks and weeks about football, and we've done that many a time, haven't we, Matt? So.
Yeah, absolutely. And there will, of course, be links to your Twitter and Instagram. And as far as your reserve team debut is concerned, getting to talk about Adelaide United for 2 hours, that's a pretty strong start, mate. So absolutely fine. Matt, as well, obviously you're more involved with the Red Army. Also, if people want to check out more of your stuff on social media, if people want to check out more from the Adelaide Active Support, where's the best place to find that detail?
Yeah, look, I definitely suggest you hitting up Red Army AUFC on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You'll find lots of really interesting content and support for how you can get involved in Red Active Bay and also the club in general. Lots of extra things happening there all the time. The Red Army are working really hard towards. The banner that was put up today was painted almost entirely by the kids at the day, so it'll look a bit of a mess, but it's going to look amazing when we put it up on the 3rd of January, the first home game. If you want to see me, you'll be able to find me on Twitter at Mcgree Oz, AUS. Yeah, it's all football politics for me on there. So, for me, it's your peril.
It's your own risk, yeah.
Yeah.
That's fine, mate. Like, there's no one's Twitter's more biased and opinionated than mine, mate. So as long as you can strike that happy medium between both, I think you'll be absolutely fine. But of course, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. As far as the channel is concerned, we've got full season previews coming out for the remaining A-League sides throughout the course of this week, all the way through the holiday and Christmas period, leading up to the 27th and the league starting, which we all cannot wait for. If you want to help support the channel that little bit more, you can drop a like on this video. It does help us get higher in YouTube search results when people look for A-League and W-League football content or Australian New Zealand football content across the board. You can also subscribe to the channel to be kept up to date on all of our future videos as we try and edge our way towards 100 subscribers prior to the start of the A-League season. If you want to check out all sorts of Australian New Zealand football content, including stuff from myself, from Bill, from whoever else, you can check out thereserveteam.com.au. But the part that means the most to us is just the fact that you've watched along and listened to us waffle on for a few hours about the season coming up ahead. So we thank you. From myself, from Bill, from Matt, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you all again next time.